providing technical assistance and project management oversight since 2004. They've used funds that they've received from EPA to conduct a brownfield assessment. They used over $50,000 in their grant money. During that time, the city applied for its own grant, which was $400,000 that we mentioned. DEQ's also invested their time in and above their grant to the tune of about $27,000. What DEQ, United and I wanted to convey was that they're working with the city of Astoria and our company to identify a cost-effective, protective, and environmentally sound method of managing the Safeway stockpile soils, and that the goal is really to find alternatives to just hauling all the material off to Hillsborough landfill, which would consume most of the cleanup funds.
What are you going to get into the alternatives? Besides hauling it away, we can't just haul it away.
Yeah, well, hopefully some reuse alternatives, but yes, we're definitely getting there.
But you're going to touch on that here in a minute.
Yes, yes. So this is the DEQ approval letter for the characterization work that was done. So they have approved it with the revised biocore modeling. They have approved the cleanup. This is their letter dated 1st of this month, next. But they are requesting some additional soil sampling data before we can proceed with the actual cleanup. And so just to answer the why, a few reasons. One is, based on the existing contaminant information, we would have to take all of the stockpiled soils either to Hillsborough landfill or Arlington landfill, which is not an ideal option from either environmental or a cost standpoint. Secondly, there's an undetermined amount of hotspot soil and soil above risk-based concentrations that's underneath the raised parking decks. We don't know exactly how much is there. And together, depending on how that was handled, those two items could potentially exceed the $200,000 budget that's for the cleanup portion of the project. And it could also result in a delay of getting a no further action from DEQ, again because of not knowing exactly what soils are above, say, residential cleanup levels or depending on different uses. And then the final part is the chlorinated solvents that are in the groundwater, sort of right on the, I'm looking at the site now, right next to Duane Street in the groundwater there, not knowing quite how far or quickly that HVOC groundwater source might travel. DEQ's wanting to see a little more information on that groundwater. Next. So the current sampling event for this month, and the supplementary sampling plan was approved by both DEQ and EPA on June 29th, is going to involve 30 to 40 soil samples to be tested for diesel, PAHs, halogenated volatile organic compounds, metals, again it's the lead and cadmium, PCBs, and then in addition some physical parameters which will help determine the suitability of some of the soils for potential local reuse. And so the city's looking at some possible places to use some of the soil, but really we've got to see what are the chemical concentrations and what are the physical properties, moisture content, organic content, grain size, that will allow us to know where it can be transported, and hopefully not all of it needs to go to Hillsborough. One other thing I wanted to point out is for this round of sampling, the EPA is providing their Region 10 laboratory in Manchester, Washington, free of charge. So that's basically another $10,000 to $14,000 value for the city here. So it's pretty rare for EPA to volunteer that. And so what we're hoping to get from this additional testing is to determine which of the soils we might be able to reuse locally versus transporting to Hillsborough, and determine what would need to be done to get an NFA in the near term for the site, so complete no further action for the site. And the additional sampling is scheduled to begin tomorrow, so that's when folks will be out there. Next. So final steps in the process between now and the end of the year. Once we've got the samples and we've received the laboratory data, we would prepare a report detailing those results that would be delivered mid-August. At that point, the council may need to make a decision as to whether or not any parking deck removal might be necessary to remove the contaminated soils. Now, in talking to the engineer that had worked on the Heritage Square site, he thinks it's unlikely that there would need to be parking deck removal, but we really won't know until we've sampled the soils and we find out exactly what all would need to be removed to get an MFA that we can look at that. But it's sort of just a forewarning that there may be a need for council decision there. Next step would be to prepare the analysis of brownfield cleanup alternatives. And you'd asked about the different alternatives. Most of the alternatives that we would be contemplating right now for the soil would be dig and haul options. The question really is whether they would be hauled to someplace locally or someplace further away. For groundwater, there may be nothing needed. It might be monitoring, but we're not envisioning large-scale groundwater remediation. And we expect to have that plan prepared by September, October. There also need to be a contaminated media management plan put in place before the contractors could remove the soil. Again, September for that. At that point, we would remove the stockpiles from the former Safeway footprint and the two areas beneath the parking deck. And some of the stuff beneath the parking deck is probably going to have to go to Arlington, but we don't know how much of that. And then prepare the final report in December. So that's the plan. And then I've just got a note at the bottom, and it's not going to be readable, I guess, to most of you due to the small print, but the alternative brownfields cleanup alternatives, analysis brownfield cleanup alternatives doesn't necessarily have to be approved before removing the soil piles. If everyone agrees that that can happen, then we could get what's called an interim action, and so get that out of the way before the actual final report is approved. Next. So just the areas in red are where we expect to be removing the soil. To the left is the two Safeway stockpiles, and then the circled areas under the parking lot are a little less defined. We don't know exactly what those will be yet.
This one here is
Next. So I think this is the final slide really, is that as far as final status of the site, we're not anticipating any restriction on future development. We're expecting that any currently contemplated uses of residential or commercial would be okay. We do expect the EQ to restrict groundwater use, so we wouldn't be able to put a groundwater drinking well on the site or in Duane Street. That shouldn't be an issue. The contaminated media management plan would be required to be maintained for the site. It's something that would already be prepared, so it just would sit on the shelf basically. And then finally, the timing of the NFA at this point is uncertain until we've gotten the rest of the soil results. We're not going to know for sure whether it's something that can be knocked out in a couple months or whether we have to get a little more creative and figure out how to get there. Next, go ahead.